Welcome to another session of CoteCast. Today we're going to be talking about organic molecules. But first, let's start out and talking about the building blocks and the macromolecules and the difference between the two. Building blocks are the units that you put together to make the larger macromolecules. We call these building blocks monomers. Mono referring to one. They are small units that join together with other small units to form the polymers. Poly refers to many. Polymers are macromolecules. These are the larger molecules that are made up of a combination of monomers. So the building blocks are monomers. Those are the small molecules. They make up the larger molecules called macromolecules, which are called polymers. Now let's get on to our organic molecules. There are 4 different types of organic molecules. There's carbohydrates, there's lipids, there's proteins, and there's nucleic acids. We'll start out with the carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates, there are 3 different types of elements, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, that make up the carbohydrates. And the building blocks or monomers of carbohydrates are monosaccharides. They have a molecular formula of C6H12O6. That means 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. And they have a ratio of 2:1 of hydrogens to oxygens. So for every oxygen you have, you're going to have 2 hydrogen atoms. Now, there's 3 different types of carbohydrates. There's monosaccharides, mono referring to 1, saccharides referring to sugar, disaccharides, di referring to 2, and saccharides referring to sugar, and polysaccharides, poly referring to many, and saccharides again referring to sugar. Now, the way that these monosaccharides are connected together is a process called dehydration synthesis, or we can also call it condensation. So whenever you form a bond between 2 monomers, what happens is you remove a water. So dehydration, when you're dehydrated, you lose water, right? So when you synthesize something, you make something. So we lose a water when we form a bond, and that is dehydration synthesis, or it's also called condensation. This is how it would occur. So what we have here is we have 1 amino acid, and we're going to learn in just a moment that amino acids are the building blocks or monomers of proteins. And we take a hydroxide group off of 1 amino acid, this is called the carboxyl group of this amino acid, and we take a hydrogen off the amino group of this amino acid, and that forms a water. Where those 2 used to be, now we form a bond. So we form a bond and we lose a water. So losing a water, dehydration, forming a bond, that's the synthesis part. The next type of organic molecule is a lipid. Now, lipid, just like carbohydrates, has carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen as its elements. But in this case, we're going to talk about a triglyceride. There's several different types of lipids, but we'll just focus on triglycerides to make it easy here. So the building blocks is 1 glycerol and 3 fatty acids. And that makes a triglyceride. There's also all different types of lipids too. Steroids can be lipids. You can have phospholipids that make up membranes. There's all different types. But just for simplicity's sake, we'll stick with the triglycerides, which is a glycerol and 3 fatty acids. Most lipids have fatty acids within them. So here's an example of a triglyceride. Now you'll notice here that there's 1, 2, 3 bonds. So, and when forming those 3 bonds, here's our 3 fatty acids forming our glycerol, we lose 3 waters, 1 for each bond. Now, the next type is a nucleic acid. Nucleic acids have the nucleotides as their building blocks or monomers, and there's 2 different types. There's DNA, which is deoxyribonucleic acid. That's our genetic material. And there's also RNA, ribonucleic acid, and that's involved in protein synthesis. And we're going to be talking a lot more about those later on when we get into heredity and molecular genetics. These are the building blocks, or the components of a nucleotide, I should say. Here's DNA. This is the sugar of DNA. And then we have the cytosine, thymine, adenine, and guanine. And you take one of these nitrogen bases, connect it to the sugar, and you have a phosphate group, and that's your nucleotide. For RNA, it has a different sugar. It has ribose, and it has cytosine. Instead of thymine, it has uracil, adenine, or guanine. So you take ribose and one of these nitrogen bases and add a phosphate, and that's the nucleotide for RNA, an RNA nucleotide. Our last type is called a protein. Proteins are different from carbohydrates and lipids in that they have nitrogen. So proteins, the elements are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. The building blocks are amino acids, and there's 20 different types of amino acids. And if you look right here at this R group here, this R group doesn't stand for radon or anything like that. What it is, it's simply a variable, and this can be one of 20 different things, and that determines which type of amino acid it is. This area right here is called the amino group, the NH2 group, and then this part is called the carboxyl group. And this structure is the general structure for an amino acid. So those are the different types of organic molecules. You have carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. And those are the polymers, the macromolecules, the big molecules of living organisms. And then you have the monomers that make them up. Proteins are made up of amino acids. Our lipids have the fatty acids. In the case of triglycerides, the glycerol and 3 fatty acids. We have nucleotides making up the nucleic acids, and then we have our monosaccharides making up our carbohydrates. So I hope you've learned a little bit about the different organic molecules, and we are going to be working on a organic molecule identification lab coming up in the next couple days. So have a great one, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.